is also tied up with work, so I think it's just the three of you.
Looks like we're live now.
Well, we have a quorum and I'm going to go off camera because it's messing with my bandwidth. And I have
Okay.
a mask on anyway. Can't even
All
see
right.
me.
We have our sunglasses on and it's dark out. Is that what you're going to say?
No, I'm on my way home from a conference in an Uber. So
Okay. Dan Voss, you know where that line's from? Where's Dan Voss?
That one I actually know.
Oh, you that one? Oh, that one you know. Okay. I'm impressed.
Right?
Yeah, Blues Brothers. Okay, it's 4 o'clock. Call to order. The finance committee meeting of the Park District of Highland Park is called to order on Thursday, November 18th, 2021 at exactly 4 p.m. Pursuant to Section 7E of the Open Meetings Act, the president of the Board of the Park District Commissioners has made a finding that it is not practical or prudent to hold in-person meetings because of COVID-19 public health emergency. Neither the elected officials nor the public will be allowed to attend regular or committee meetings in person, but will participate virtually by the means described below. And I don't know where it says below, but I guess that means the means described that we're having this virtual meeting through Zoom. So that being said, I'll let Roxanne call the roll, please.
Commissioner Bernstein,
Here.
Commissioner Freeman,
here.
President Rottenberg.
Here.
We have a quorum. The next item on the agenda is additions to the agenda. Executive Director Romes, are there any additions to the agenda?
No additions.
The only, any other commissioners or the president, do you have any additions to the agenda?
Not I.
The only addition that I have is to let Roxanne know that I just signed that DocuSign document, so she should have it.
I saw. Thank you, Cal.
Okay, sure, you're welcome. All right, so the next item on the agenda is public comment for items on the agenda. Executive Director Romes, is there anyone from the public attending tonight's meeting? Or, excuse me, this afternoon's meeting? No, is there anybody?
No, there's not.
Okay, if anybody does decide to attend, please let us know. So at least someone's monitoring that. Next item on the agenda is the approval of the Finance Committee meeting minutes from October 21st, 2021. I reviewed them and they seem to be in order, so I'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
There's a motion by President Ruttenberg. Is there a second? There's a second by Commissioner Freeman. All in favor, say aye.
Hi.
The ayes have it and the motion carries. The next item on the agenda is the 2022 budget presentation. Director Peters to present.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Let's get this to presentation mode. Okay, can everybody see the screen?
Yes.
It says budget presentation 2022. Okay, all right, so let's start off.
Marilyn, how long is this presentation would you estimate?
Like 30 minutes.
Okay, all right. Everyone get comfortable. Make sure you're in a comfortable chair and sit back and okay, Marilyn, sorry to interrupt.
Oh, that's okay. All right.
And Jen, I hope your Uber ride's shorter than 30 minutes.
Yeah, I don't know about that.
Okay. All right, go ahead, Marilyn.
Okay. All right. So first we're going to start off with our budget calendar. The first thing on there is today, the November 18th Finance Committee meeting, where we are going to go through the 2022 draft financial tables. And then at the next Finance Committee meeting, which will take place on December 8th, we will look at the 2022 draft budget book as a whole. So it contains the financial tables we'll be looking at today, but of course, a lot more detail. And so today's review is more of a high level review. And then on December 8th, it'll be a more detailed review of the rest of the budget book. Then at the December 16th Park Board meeting, we will present the final proposed budget book for 2022. And then that will need to sit for 30 days so that then on January 25th, we can hold a public hearing regarding the 2022 combined budget and appropriation. And then after the public hearing, we would have our budget ordinance approval for the 2022 combined budget and appropriation. So now we want to go to what our budget highlights and assumptions are that we use when preparing this year's budget. So this year, just in general, When we put the budget together, we based it on phase 5, which we are calling the new normal. If you recall last year, the budget for 2021 was based on phase 4 due to the states of Illinois phase reentry, the Recovery Act. When we go through this budget, we're going to see that we compare our 2022 budget a lot to the 2020 budget. It would be difficult to use 2021, the budget, again, because it was a budget for phase 4. 2021 operations were also curtailed in January and February with mitigations and things throughout the year. So those wouldn't be good numbers to compare ourselves to. And of course, 2020 operations would be even worse. So we thought the most comprehensive, comparable numbers we could use would be the budget from 2020. When we look at revenues in the 2022 budget, we of course look at our property taxes, which are based on CPI plus new growth. If you recall, this past Tuesday, the board did pass the Truth in Taxation resolution regarding the property taxes. And of course, property taxes are our largest source of income here at the Park District. And so we will do a quick review. We have a slide or two on that, and then we'll look at the rest of the budget. The revenues exclude impact fees. Impact fees are variable as far as when we get them, if we get them, how much they are. And so we never want to put revenue numbers into the budget that really won't come to fruition, since it would impact the whole budget down to the bottom line and our transfer over to the capital fund. So it does not include impact fees. You're going to see significantly reduced interest income. Interest rates right now are at about 0.2%. We just researched these with our 3 banks at 0.2% for $1 million 1-year certificate of deposit, which equates to about $2,000 of interest income for a year. So that is significantly reduced. In the budget, you'll see recreation program revenue approximately 2% more than the 2020 budget. And then you'll see some yellow highlights throughout the budget surrounding debt certificates and the capital fund. That is because we will not get our closing statements for the $17 million of debt certificates that we just issued. And so all the closing costs and such have not funneled through. We'll get that December 1st. That's when we get our cash. And so we will be going back and amending the debt certificate amount and the amount received in the capital fund. It should not be material. We put 17 million into capital, and the debt certificates, we use our best estimate, but we'll probably be off a few $1,000s. And again, that'll be adjusted when we look at the budget book at the next finance committee meeting. On the expense side of things, we have the employee merit pool raises at 3%, which are consistent with what we had in the 2020 budget. We had to increase minimum wages across the board by $1, as that is statute that we must follow. Included in expenses this year is strategic planning. That is something that is not in there every year, but rather every few years. And so it is in there for 2022. We had planned to do that in 2021, but did not have that happen with COVID and everything else going on. So that's in 2022. You'll see a significant reduction in pension contributions to IMRF, as you'll see that go down by about 19%. That is because we have such a well-funded pension balance. The state dictates what we have to pay into that. And so there's good savings there. We also have, as a one-time budget line item, the nonprofit coach. They are an organization that was working with the foundation and also doing some work here at the Park District to teach staff how to better generate donations to come into the district to support various unfunded or underfunded projects around the district. We also have budgeted for a salary survey or a compensation study. Again, that was something we were hoping to have happen in 2021, but it's been deferred to 2022. And again, that is something that doesn't hit our expenses every year, but it does hit it every few years because it is written into Park District policy that takes place. Okay, moving on, we're going to review the Truth in Taxation resolution that was passed by the board this past Tuesday at the board meeting. if you recall, we have a tax capped general fund. The extension in 2021 was $5.7 million. The levy request for 2022 is $5.8 million. So that's an increase of $140,000 or a 2.47% increase. Keep in mind, this percentage is made up of CPI, which is 1.4%, and then roughly another 1% of growth. We received notice back in September from Lake County that the growth they had on the books at that point, so that's new construction or people doing additions to their homes or permitted work to their homes that increases EAV and whatnot. That was at $25 million. So that was for the first 3 quarters, but there's still a quarter open. So this levy is meant to capture all new growth. We did verify that Albion made it in there. That is the largest new construction that will affect our levy request for 2022. Then we look at the tax capped recreation fund, and they have an extension for 2021 of $5.4 million. And then the levy request for that will be $5.5 million, which is an overall increase of $133,000. And so that percent increase is also 2.47%. Finally, we have the non-tax cap special recreation fund. Recall that the special recreation fund is purely based on a percent of EAV. It's 0.04% of EAV. Last year, the commissioners wanted to have a flat increase in property taxes. And so how we attain that, we did not want to touch our tax cap funds, because once you do not do a full levy there, that money is lost forever and it compounds into perpetuity. So the better way to do that is through the special recreation fund, is it is a non-tax cap. And so when you reduce it, it affects the 1 year. Another reason we were able to do that, if you recall, is because we were budgeted in 2020 to pay over $300,000 out of that fund to NSSRA for the new building. And that didn't happen. That got pushed back to 2021. And so we were able to significantly reduce our levy for special recreation. It went from the usual 0.04% to a little over 0.02%. And again, that's how we kept the tax levy flat for 2021. However, in 2022, it's a different story. We are going with the full 0.04%. If you recall, when we looked at our funding for the capital fund model, the 5-year or the 10-year, each and every year in there, we're pretty much showing special recreation capital needs to be at least $500,000. And so doing a full levy gets us to be able to transfer that $500,000 each year over to the capital fund to construct those ADA projects. I do want to point out that even when we have more ADA projects than say the $500,000 or $550,000 transfer, we just take that out of the capital fund. We don't let those projects go unfunded, but we do want to reimburse for them from the special recreation fund as much as we can. And so with that full levy at the 0.04%, that is an increase of about $400,000 or 6.78% in the special recreation fund. So when you look at the tax levy in totality, that gives us an extension of $11.7 million from 2021, our levy request of $12.3 million in 2022, with a total increase of about $674,000 or a 5.76% increase. And because this is over 5%, we will need to have a truth in taxation hearing, which is scheduled for the December board meeting, and will be immediately followed then by a vote on the truth in taxation ordinance.
Okay, just want to pause it right there for a second. I just want to make sure we voted on this on Tuesday. We talked about this at the Finance Committee meeting because we approved the minutes on October. Oh, hold on a second. Barney, why don't you take this? I got to keep this call. Sorry about that.
If I knew what he was asking, I could probably do it, but these are all numbers that we have reviewed extensively previous to this.
Yes.
And did discuss the impact on an individual homeowner.
Mm-hmm.
And we saw that the impact was, again, a quantifiable amount, which I believe was $100
It was about $67.
Okay, so I rounded up because that's, good budgeting. And so it had, relatively speaking, minimal impact on the homeowners in our community.
Right. And, too, the thing to point out, that would really be the maximum impact because we know we have at least $25 million of new construction in here. So, if you were to weigh it out that way, it's going to hit heavier on the new construction because previously it wasn't really being taxed, probably
Right.
to the extent it would be now.
Right.
So I would say that would be a worst case scenario, that $67.
I do want to go back to one thing. We'll give Cal a chance to catch up.
Okay.
You said that we're taking into consideration the increase of $1 per hour in the minimum wage.
Yes.
What does that bring our minimum wage? What does that bring our, I'll call it baseline wage to? Minimum wage.
$12 an hour.
All right. And in reality, as far as what we were paying over the summer to recruit people, were we paying anywhere above $12?
I believe we definitely were, and I think we feel that we are going to have to in the future, and you're going to see that a little later when we look at a significant increase in budgeted expenses at Rosewood Beach. It's lifeguard expenses. Everyone is increasing minimum, going above that minimum wage to attract people to come and work. There's such a workforce shortage right now.
So Marilyn, so the minimum wage number is I'll call it a base number, but as we go through the numbers for expenses on each particular project, you've taken into account the fact that we will need to pay more than the minimum wage.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, depending on what the positions are.
Yes. Okay. I would say that perhaps we should continue, and if Cal wants to
I'm
come
back.
back. All right.
I'm back. Sorry about that. I'm just problem doing these at 4 o'clock. Jen, do you have anything you'd like to ask at this point, or while we're pausing?
I'm good, thank you.
Okay, I just want to make sure that we're clear is that obviously this has to be messaged to the community, since this levy is higher than what in the past the Park District has done. It appears that the vast majority of the levy is in the special rec fund. Is that correct? The
Yes.
increase?
Yes.
So I think that I think when we message this as the community, we have to reflect as what Barney was describing. A lot of this is involving the new construction, and just welcome to my life, guys. And then the other is the special rec.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Correct. Yes.
All right, great. Thank you. That's it. I'm fine.
Okay. All right. Then we will move on. We have one more tax slide. Just to remind you too, that previously we also discussed the supplemental tax ordinance, so ordinance 2020-106, which you will see at the board meeting in December, is an ordinance authorizing a supplemental property tax levy to pay the principal of and interest on the outstanding general obligation limited tax park bonds, Series 2020 of the Park District of Highland Park. And that amount is going to be it's a little over $19,000 extra that will go into the debt service fund. And that is attributable to the, when we originally issued the debt, the assumed CPI was going to be 2%, but CPI came in at 1.4%. So it causes us to be a little bit under levied there. And so that's what this will correct. And again, we had discussed this. Bob Lewis had been here for PMA to walk us through it. And I think I've walked us through it. And that's just a reminder that will be before you in December as well. Okay, so we are going to start out at a very high level, looking at our district-wide budget comparison. We don't have bonds in this because bonds are sort of few and far between. They don't happen every year, and they're at all different amounts. So that is excluded from this, as is capital. Same with capital, right? One year you could have a lot, next year a little amount. So it varies so much. We don't want that to skew our numbers. And we also don't put transfers in here because those vary from year to year too. But if we look at our total district-wide budget for 2020, we were at about 24.2 million. And in 2022, we're at 24.5 million. So we are budgeting an increase in revenue of about $237,000, which is about a 1% increase. On the flip side, the expenses, in 2020, we budgeted $22.6 million for expenses. And then in 2022, we are at $22.5 million of expenses. So that's a decrease of about $100,000 or about half a percentage point. So overall, when you compare the surplus from 2020 to 2022, you can see that we have an increased surplus of about $334,000 or 20%. And now we're going to take those numbers and drill down to get a better understanding of some of the line items that have a larger fluctuation to them. So we're going to start by looking at lessons. And if we look at them in 2020, we had budgeted to be at about $370,000. And we actually lowered that when we were doing our phase 4 budgeting for 2021 for lessons. And lo and behold, we had just an outstanding year in 2021. Our projections are far exceeding where we had budgeted to be. When we go ahead and do our 22 budget, however, we don't want to, you never want to overestimate your revenues, because again, we rely on those so much. It's the top of our, entire funding source to go into capital. So we don't want to fund the district. So you want to be careful not to over budget. And because it was such an incredibly good year, will it happen again? Not sure. We're more comfortable with this budget number of the $471,000, which is still almost $100,000 increase over 2020, or a 26% increase in lesson revenue. We're also highlighting taxes here because we want you to see that they're pretty consistently around $13 million. When we compare 2020 to 2022, it's an increase of about $300,000 or 2%. And you're going to say, you just showed us a slide that showed a bigger increase, which is true. In 2020, when that budget was completed, we were pretty aggressive on our taxes there, and they actually didn't come to fruition. And so, when we look at the change, this is a little skewed. It would really be, if we looked at 2020 actual versus the 2022 budget, this would actually be a larger increase that better reflects that 2.47% that we just saw on the previous slide. As far as fees and charges, in 2020, we were at 1.8 million. We kept that pretty consistent in our budget for 2021. And then golf came along and just, knocked the socks out of it by about $1 million, which is where we're projecting them to finish at year end. Now, they had a season of perfect weather, warm weather. We had the Northbrook course closed down. It was, the perfect COVID sport. It's outdoors. It's small crowds of people. So again, we do not want to take this 2.8 million and budget that for 2022. We want something really in between, because again, we don't want to over budget our revenue. And so this is the number we went with. It's about a $550,000 increase, or a 30% increase in our fees and charges. Now, memberships is a little bit different story from lessons and our fees and charges. Our budget for that in 2020 was about 1.6 million. Going with a budget for phase 4, knowing that indoor facilities are, really hit hard. There's, if they're not closed, there's limitations on who can be in there, what activities can take place. Everyone's got to wear a mask. The budget was greatly reduced, and we actually are projecting to really pretty much come in right where we budgeted for 2021. Going into 2022 with our phase 5 budget, we have also significantly changed what our membership structures are going to look like, our offerings there. So we are still budgeting to come down in revenue from 2020 from 1.6 million to 1.2 million. So about a $400,000 decrease, or a 25% decrease in that line item in revenue. And then finally, in revenue, interest income, like we just discussed, our budget was $170,000 in 2020. We brought that down to $15,000 in 2021, and we didn't even make it there. So we are reducing that to $6,000 for 2022. So that's almost 100% decrease on where we were in interest income 2 years ago. On the expense side of things, we're going to look at memberships for a moment. We have not.
Hold on a second, Marilyn.
Yes.
Let's just, while we're focused on revenues, anybody have any
Yes.
questions or comments? Okay.
No, I follow it.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, thanks.
Okay, all right, on expenses, memberships is a new line item for us. You can see all these zeros here. So we have put a budget in for membership expense so we can track that better and compare it to our membership revenue. So that's new for 2022. Salary and wages, as we discussed, that 3% merit increase. So if you compare 2020 to 2022, we are showing just under a 3% increase in salaries and wages, which is about $208,000. And then finally, I just wanted to point out how pension contributions look district-wide. Back in 2020, they were at about 900,000. We cut that by about 100,000 in our budget in 2021, and we still came under budget. And now we're budgeting even less. So there's that 19% reduction we talked about. It is driven largely by the reduced IMRF rate that we have to pay because we have such a well-funded pension obligation. And so that's all I have on this slide.
Before you continue, any questions, comments regarding this?
Yes, Commissioner Bernstein, I do have a question. May I ask a question?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. Salaries and wages. In this year, I understand that we were quite low in our expenses for salaries and wages, and we have a whole bunch of open positions. Does the 2022 budget assume that we're going to fill the open positions?
It does, yes. And we're going to look at that a little bit more closely in a few minutes too.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Mhm.
Commissioner Freeman, do you have any questions, comments?
No, nothing from me, thanks.
I just have a couple maybe. With regard to materials and supplies, you're showing almost a 14% decrease. Is there, you anticipating buying less this year, or what's behind that?
You know, we do, what my notes were showing, just based on all the conversations with everyone, is that, you know, one of the things we tried to do was use materials that we had on hand already, trying to use less of things, less even like decorations, say when we have events, and just overall really trying to be more conscientious of what we're doing. We've also bought on like Amazon Business Prime, where we're seeing significant reductions in costs of materials and supplies around the district. So, you know, that one, I don't have you know, like a big juicy item I can give you on that one. It's just a little bit here, a little bit there.
And what about special events? You're showing a fairly significant reductions from 2020, since considering, I believe we're going to be in stage 5. You anticipate still we're going to be limited in special events?
Right. So special events, if you look at revenues, they're really back to where they once were, is what we're budgeting at. But yes, again, with reduced costs of those special events. They're
and what's the reduced cost from fewer events, or where's that?
They're having more smaller events, still some medium and larger scale, but more smaller events, and that should bring us some efficiencies there.
Okay, and I apologize because I got distracted, but with regard to fees and charges, I saw that there's the additional $1 million from the golf course, but tracking from 2020 to 2022, is that increase, that $500,000 increase, is that attributed to Sunset Valley?
Yes.
Okay, I apologize. I got distracted.
And
Okay.
and the golf learning center too.
Got it. Okay. Okay. Any other questions, comments before we move on? Okay, next slide.
Okay, so now we're going to go into the functions of the Park District. We have 3 functions. We have an administrative function, a recreation function, and a parks function. And the administration function is responsible for the management of the district's short and long-term planning, executive administration of district-wide operations, financial management, human resource administration, risk management, information technology systems, and marketing and communications activities. So again, it does not include parks or recreation when we look at these numbers. And so a couple things, again, so here you see the interest income, again, that we just spoke about. On the slide, we can see better miscellaneous income. We can see this increase from 2020 to 2022 of about $539,000. The bulk of that, $500,000, is what we have set up for Park Avenue for the additional funding we are looking for to have come in to fund the breakwater and the ramp work. So that's the reason for the increase there. When we look at other income, we typically do not budget for other income. We can see that in 2021, we did take in almost $90,000 of other income. About $70,000 of that was from the donation from the Parks Foundation for the youth golf area at Sunset Valley. The other $18,000 was from the IEPA. We had been reimbursed. There was some sort of a leaking tank over at Pogo, so they reimbursed us for some of the costs there to have that removed. This year, other income, we're actually going to budget because this is money promised to us from the Albion development, and we actually have some of this cash on hand already sitting in deferred income. As Sunset Woods over there along by Albion gets beautified or rejuvenated, we will be using that money that they have given to us that we're sitting on to invest over there, and then we will expect a little bit more to come our way from them as well. So that's what this other income item represents. Down in expenses under contractual services, you can also see a pretty big pickup there of about $1.5 million. In that area, we have about $1.5 million for that is due for professional fees for West Ridge Center as we begin looking at options for what to do with this site. There's $100,000 in this number for the compensation study that's required by the district's policies to have done every few years. And then also in here is nonprofit coach expense, the consultants that are, again, teaching staff how to go about fundraising and looking to raise funds for specific projects or unfunded or underfunded projects around the district. And that's about $163,000. So that is all included in that contractual services number. And then finally, on capital outlay, which we discussed before, it fluctuates so much from year to year. We had a budget of $7.6 million in 2020, a $5 million budget in 2021 that did not come to fruition. And so now we're at about $10.6 million for 2022. And we know that a good portion of that is going to be starting to work on Westridge, in addition to all the other projects that we had previously shown to you in the 5-year capital plan. So when we look at this then down below overall where we sit in the administrative function, we were at our total surpluses down here for 2020, we were at $4 million after transfers, and we have increased transfers somewhat. We're actually going to look at transfers a little bit more closely in a few minutes. But when we look at our various deficits and surpluses over the past couple of years, you know, that they fluctuate a lot. And again, it's a lot because you have fluctuations in your capital. That's really your biggest driving factor down there. But we're going to look at this a little bit more closely in a few more slides. So,
Mary Lynn,
yes.
how did you factor in the higher inflation rates in these budget numbers?
When you say so higher, so we use certain increases. A lot of things we use a 3% increase, but as people are more familiar with their individual budgets and what they are seeing as pricing, or even, you know, basing it on what am I paying for something right now? So, you know, it's almost next year. How much has something gone up? You know, it's really baked into here by each individual manager and area that's working on their budget.
I guess I'll ask my question a different way. I mean, obviously, you know, baked in, you know, we were having inflation 1%, 2%, 3% at the most, and I believe in this last quarter was over 6%. So what you're saying is that that's really you don't take that into account when you do these numbers because you're using historical numbers that are given to you by the department heads?
Well, so don't forget, in this we will be looking at next time. You know, we are looking at increasing fees in several areas, which we do each year, so that helps mitigate it. The other thing I will say, our largest source of income is our property taxes. And so my expectation is CPI probably will come in at 5% or close to it. So, that gets automatically added in next year when we do the tax levy.
Yeah,
So
but I'm talking about expenses. I'm not talking about revenue.
Understood. Well, I would say yes, our insurance costs, we get information from our insurance carriers to come up with what, that increase is going to be. Utilities, we have locked in contracts.
Again, I don't think you're understanding my question. My question is more, it's going to cost more for uniforms. It's going to cost more for paper. It's going to cost, and how is that baked into these numbers? Or is it baked into these numbers?
Yeah, let me just try and answer that a little bit. I think, Kelly, answer your question. There's probably, it varies from area to area, but I would say it's probably more like a 4% increase that is in these numbers. These budgets were, prepared starting in May of this year. So over time we've certainly updated them. But the other thing to consider is that when we approve the budget, we do a budget and an appropriation, and the appropriation is 10%. So that 10% accounts for any unanticipated inflation or costs and things of that nature. So while I think the short answer to your question is we probably don't have the amount of inflation that you are suggesting. We,
I'm just telling you what's going on in the world. I'm not making into stuff. This is going on in the world right now. And so that's the question. I just want to make sure that with inflation double or almost triple what we've experienced over the last 25 years, that you're taking that into account when you come in with these expense numbers.
Yeah, I think to the best of our ability, we are.
Okay, so the answer is yes.
Yes,
you're taking inflation into account. Okay.
Yeah, we took inflation into account.
Okay.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
All right. Anybody else? Anything else from anybody? Bernie?
Not from me.
Okay.
No,
Okay.
not for me either.
All right. Thanks. Anything else with this, Mary Lynn?
No, we're going to move on to our next function.
Okay.
So the second function we'll look at is our parks function. And when we look at fees and charges at parks, we see those going down by about $9,000. That's the largest cause of this reduction of the $12,000. It's about 25%. And that is primarily reflected due to sales of permits for picnic shelters and dog licenses. With Moraine Park being shut down, we are not selling as many dog licenses. Also here in parks, so salaries and wages, as we discussed before, someone asked the question, are we filling extra positions or what now? So when we looked at the beginning, we saw that our overall increase in salaries and wages is less than 3% district-wide. In Parks Foundation, when you look at it individually, we can see back in 2020, we had a budget of $1.5 million, and we were looking to fill some open spaces. That didn't happen, and so we budgeted those again in 2021. But obviously, when we look at our projections, it still didn't happen. So we're continuing to try to fill those positions now in 2022, and then with even a little bit more additional, because the preserve will now become, it'll be open, and we will need more workmen there to maintain that extra 100 acres. That we'll have at the preserve. And so you do see an increase there of about $175,000 since 2020, which is about a 12% increase. And then coinciding with that, of course, is budgeted increase in insurance for those employees that we anticipate bringing on. Under contractual services, that's another area with a larger increase in it. And contractual services, this year-over-year increase from 2020 is largely due to the necessity to treat and protect large oak trees at Sunset Woods Park from insect invasion. So that's what I have for you on the Parks Foundation, or Parks Function, sorry.
Question, comment? Are you two doing? If you're, we
I
done
do
with
have,
this slide?
I do, Cal, have a question.
Go ahead, Mr. Barney.
Thank you. Have we done a deep analysis into contractual services to see if there are contractual services that by spending money for a power saw or something, we could perform the services in-house and save some money, over the course of 20 years?
I'm going to defer to Director Voss if he's on the line. Or Executive Director Holmes. I am not aware of any sort of study. I know we have moved more things in-house, especially during, the pandemic. We've been trying to do more internally. But
and the reason let me just say, the reason I asked that, we're consistently at 300 and let's call it around $350,000 a year for contractual services, and I just keep wondering is that an opportunity for us to to bring something in-house and cut that number in any way?
So I believe, and Dan can certainly add to this, but I believe some years back, we actually increased that number significantly for a few reasons. One is we've had a hard time attracting and retaining parks staff. So as you can see, when Mary Lynn talked about how we're not hitting our budget, it's because we're not filling those positions all the time. And the other thing is a lot of that is we're very, very heavy in spring and summer. And so contractual services allows us to only have to, for example, mowing, contract out 4 months of mowing versus hiring 12 months of staff when there's a lot more work to be done in the summer. So overall, it's saved our expenses by increasing contractual. But this trend, I think, started probably 4 or 5 years ago. Dan, I don't know if you have any other context to that, if you're on the phone. Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree, Brian. A lot of this contractual work, it is mowing, it is tree removals, it is a lot of the natural areas. Why we have a great natural areas department of 3 people. Sure, we could. It's a little bit different, I think, in the construction phase of things, where it may make sense to have that work done in-house, which we do have staff that is able to do that, and that saves. But on the flip side, once you get into more of the landscaping and like the natural areas point of side of things, it's actually the reverse, where it is cheaper to have this contracted because there are enough quality companies that want that work to have that contracted out compared to adding staff, adding trucks, adding trailers to take mowers to places. That's the trend that we are seeing over, as Brian said, over the last 4 or 5 years.
All right, I guess the answer is we're also constantly looking at what we can do in-house versus need to go outside.
Correct.
All right, thank you.
Jen?
No question.
I have no questions either. Okay, next slide, please.
Okay, so our third function is the recreation function. And the highlights for recreation in 2022 include, as we said, for the entire budget, is budgeting for phase 5 of the pandemic. We have increased and revised programming camps, special events, and recreation center memberships for 2022. We are stabilizing Sunset Valley and Golf Learning Center with reduced overall participation because 2021 was just such a phenomenal year. We're not sure that we could really replicate that again in 2022. And same with lessons. Their year in 2021 were just phenomenal, and we didn't want to necessarily budget that high again for 2022. And really these numbers that we're talking about sit very standalone when we were looking at the district-wide comparison. So we're really not going to spend too much time on this slide because really most of the line items we already discussed on the other slide. I will just, a couple things again, the pension contributions, we talked about district-wide going down 19%, and we see that going down 17% here in rec. We see our taxes really, again, they're less than 3%. the increase there. When we look at our surplus down at the bottom here, we can see in 2020, we had a budgeted surplus of about 2.8 million, which then dropped when we budgeted for phase 4 in 2021, but we are projected to largely surpass what had been budgeted for in 2021. And then in 2022, again, sort of a hybrid between the two. And again, with the lessons and fees and charges, we are projecting a $3 million surplus before transfers, which is about a $340,000 increase over 2020, which is about a 12% increase overall in surplus.
Questions, comments?
Oh, I do have a question.
Sure,
I'm
go
sorry.
ahead, Bernie.
Oh, that's okay.
And I see $100 and some odd thousand for merchandising. What, are we selling T-shirts or something? I mean,
So that's mostly the pro shop over at the golf course. And we probably should have touched on that. So we had budgeted that at $174,000 in 2020. And then we brought that down for 2021 for phase 4. All over, they did outpace themselves. The projection for 2021, we're pulling that really with the exceptional number of extra people going through at the golf course. And the more people you have there, the anticipation is that more people are stopping by to purchase things. So again, that number, we're being cautious with what we're showing for merchandising there.
okay. Do we have, and I'm glad that you mentioned the Sunset Valley. Do we have any possible opportunities for merchandising elsewhere? Rec center or tennis club or ice
So
rink?
that is a great question. I believe Director Gagol is on the line. I don't know if she wants to address it at all, but we are looking into, and I think calling it like an online shop, and she could probably answer better what we are planning on putting on there.
Yes, we are looking into the possibility of doing an online shop on our new website when it launches in February. And that would have an array of different types of merchandise, gifts, apparel, things like that. So we're in the process right now of trying to find a vendor that we don't have to hold inventory, but we can still, ship and customize the merchandise.
Okay, well, do we sell, and I apologize because I haven't played tennis for a bunch of years. Do we sell any tennis garb or any accoutrements at the tennis courts?
We
do. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Mitch.
I was just gonna say, yeah, we do. We can do, as simple as selling balls to all the way up to specialized rackets that people can order through us. And we do stringing and other things of that nature as well as part of the merchandising.
Okay, I obviously wouldn't want us to get into a big inventory of workout gloves or T-shirts, but I'm just wondering if sometimes having those on hand, but there is an outlay to buy the merchandise we might not sell. Okay, thank you.
Jen?
No questions from me. Thank you.
Just one question for me regarding we use the word, probably it's not the right term, but the net income, which is projected to be $3.1 million. What's the historical norm for that number? Is it around 3 million or what is that number?
It is usually around 3 million because that supports then usually, a $2 million or so transfer over to the capital fund. And then we have debt service that we transfer out of there, which is usually about $900,000.
Got it. Okay.
And actually you can see transfers down below here. So there's the 2 million that we have discussed when we looked at the 5-year and 10-year capital funding model. And then again, this number you can see is usually about $900,000, but with the new debt issuance, we have an extra $118,000 payment coming out of Park Avenue, which you can very clearly see down here.
Okay. All right, that's all I have. Next slide.
Okay. All right, so speaking of transfers, here are what we're showing transfers for 2022 versus 2020. So if we look down here, so again, every year we pay historically about $1.5 million for debt certificates. And so we transfer 40% of that amount, which is the 622 from the general fund of the debt service fund And then again, we historically have paid then the 60% amount, about $900,000 from the recreation fund to the debt service fund for debt certificates. With our most recent issuance, we know that we have that additional $118,000 a year that we'll need to transfer from, it'll be Park Avenue, which is part of the recreation fund, over to the debt service fund. And you can again readily see that up here for the most part. We also plan on transferring, and we discussed this too when we looked at the funding model for the capital plan, $1 million from the general fund to the capital fund, which is not something we do very often, but we have occasionally done it in the past. And when we look at our fund balances in a few minutes, you'll see that we feel that this can be supported with the fund balances that we have. Excuse me, we have $2 million in there to transfer from the recreation fund to the capital fund, which we also have been showing in the 5 and 10-year capital funding model. And then our $500,000 from special rec to the capital fund. And that's pretty standard for each year. Again, that was shown in all the funding models that we've been giving you this fall. I will say back in 2020, we transferred $2.5 million from the recreation fund to the capital fund. And we transferred $550,000 from special recreation to the capital fund. And so that's giving you this difference here. So overall, our transfers are going to increase by about $450,000, which is about 15%.
Questions, comments? President Ruttenberg? Commissioner Freeman?
None from me.
The only question, I had a question, I'm trying to remember what it was. All right, when it comes to me, I'll interrupt you and stop you, but I did have a question, but I forgot it.
Okay, and we're going to look at.
Well, I remember the question.
Okay.
In the future reporting, are you going to create a separate silo for that $118,000 payment, additional debt service payment that is attributed to Park Avenue, assuming that does get spent at Park Avenue? Is there going to be, how are you going to report that to the board in the future? How the revenue and the expenses impact that expense?
So once all is sort of said and done, and we are, definitely committed to that project, I guess in February or so, if all the funding comes through that we are anticipating, we definitely are having discussions and actually done the research and have a model. We could probably maybe show you at the next finance committee meeting of what we would expect it to look like, but it would be a oh gosh, I can't, the exact name is escaping me right now. I'm going to call it a special fund or a special recreation fund. What is it called?
Sub fund.
A sub, thank you. Yes, a sub recreation fund. So yeah, so we would very much see that separately, and we will show you what that looks like. It's buried more in the supplemental schedules of the annual financial report, but yes, it is tracked separately. So anyone that wants to see, how is that fund doing? Is it holding its weight? And making the transfers over that it's supposed to be to help, pay off that debt service fund amount.
I mean, I know we're probably a year or two away from that sub fund, I guess, being sustainable or actually reporting accurate numbers. But once that occurs, I mean, probably at least for the first couple of years, you track that with a separate slide. So it's we're not looking, it's not buried somewhere, that we're actually, as a finance committee, we're actually following it.
Right, absolutely. So in all honesty, we would anticipate creating that fund during 2022. And when we get to our recreation centers in a few minutes, you can kind of see what it looks like already. And in fact, Park Avenue, is going from showing a deficit in 2020 to showing a surplus in 2022. So, and that that includes this payment, the $118,000 payment.
Okay. All right. Anything else from everybody else? All right. Next slide.
Nope.
Okay, so now again, it's the same slide over again, but this time we've got all of our transfers in at the bottom here. So we can look and see how our final net surpluses or deficit compare over the years. We can see in 2020 that we ended up with a deficit of $1.4 million. We had budgeted a $1.3 million deficit for 2021, but we all know we're having, a really good year for 2021 based on our projections. And when we look at 2022, we're just about $115,000 a larger deficit there than 2020. So that's about an 8% change.
Questions,
That we
comments?
don't use, could I suggest we don't use the word deficit?
Oh, okay.
And the reason I'm saying that is, typically a deficit means you put all the money and you pay all the bills and oh my God, you're out of money. And I think we're conveying a wrong impression when we say it's a deficit, because it's money in the bank. We have the money in the bank. It's this particular account that doesn't have the right amount of money.
Right. So I would say really that maybe we probably should have looked at this line up here, because this is our net surplus or deficit after operations and before transfers. And, we can see everything is positive. And, as a result of that being positive, then that's how we fund capital, right? We transfer out of those surpluses to help fund our capital program. So that's what you see down here. So I understand your dislike for the word deficit.
Yeah, let's just come up with a more friendly term.
Okay, I will work on that. Okay. Okay, so after everything we have discussed, this is what our 2022 budget by fund looks like. And so when we look at these, we'll start with recreation. We can see our revenues and our expenses and our surplus. And we said, it's pretty normal for us to have roughly a $3 million surplus in that fund. We can see over in special recreation that we have over a $500,000 surplus. And we can see in the general fund, we don't have a surplus. We have a little bit of a hit there. We do just want to keep in mind, and you're going to see this in a moment too, that we have, plenty of reserves in all of these, and the general fund having a little bit less than a surplus this year is really due to, some of those items that we discussed earlier that are in there that are really one-time hits or once every few year hits, and they all sort of happen to culminate in the same year. And so that's why we're showing that. But overall, in our operating funds, we definitely have a large surplus. And then, we discussed this debt service earlier, that these numbers will be tweaked a little bit once we settle on the debt on December 1st. And then here's our capital projects. We've been discussing next year's capital plan for a few months now. So that's all reflected in here. And then again, here on the bottom, we can just see transfers just very specifically what's coming out. You have your debt service again from the general and recreation fund going into debt service fund. And then you have this $3.5 million coming from the three funds going over into the capital fund. Do we have any
Questions, comments, anybody?
No.
Barney?
No.
I just hit the thesaurus discrepancy maybe instead of deficit. Maybe we'll come up with a better word.
Yes. Okay. I understand. Thank you. I'll look in my thesaurus. Okay. So we're going to break away from the budget for a minute, and we're going to go back and talk about 2021. So our 2021 budget, we had budgeted very conservatively because it was phase 4, and we had budgeted to transfer from special recreation to capital $300,000. And we had budgeted to transfer from recreation to capital $1.5 million. What we're going to come back and ask to do is transfer roughly $520,000 from special recreational capital fund and $2 million from the recreation fund to the capital fund. And so that would give us a net increase of $720,000 of a transfer to the capital fund. We have already been showing this $2 million number when we do our 5-year and 10-year capital funding model, and we've been showing $500,000 in it versus this increased $520,000. What we need to do to have this happen, we do not have to amend the budget because these are not actual expenses, they're just transfers. The auditors are recommending that we would present a resolution to you, probably not until February, just waiting for, everything that comes in after a year and to kind of settle in and make sure that making these transfers wouldn't do anything to our reserves and our fund balances that we wouldn't want them to, but we are feeling, very sure that we will be able to transfer over these amounts, of course, with the board's approval. And so when we take that and roll it forward, we have our fund balance history and projections. So we're going to look at our general fund first, and we can see the general fund balance tends to fluctuate a lot from year to year. When we go back and look at 2018 on forward, what we can definitely see is this large jump at the end of 2020. And that was, deep in the heart of COVID. And we were recommended, really try to minimize your transfers. You want to have a lot of operating cash on hand because you just, you're not sure what was going to happen next. And so that's what we did at the end of 2020. In 2021, which is where we are now, we are projecting to have a 92% reserve at the end of the year. And then at the end of 2022, you're going to see that go down because 2022 is where we're recommending making that $1 million transfer into the capital fund. When we look at the recreation fund, that one's a little bit more stable, usually in the 40s or 50s as far as fund balance on hand. Again, at the end of 2020, we were conservative with any transfers to capital, again, told to keep operating cash on hand just in case because of the pandemic. We can see at the end of this year with that increased $1.5 to $2 million transfer that we are still sitting on a healthy reserve there. And then budgeting another $2 million transfer next year to capital that we are still sitting on a healthy reserve in that fund. And then as far as the special recreation fund, we can see, as we discussed before, we were sitting on a very healthy balance at the end of 2020 because we did not spend the over $300,000 on the NSSRA building that year. And so that having that much reserve allowed us to have that 0% effect with the tax levy and levying not the 0.04%, but the 0.02, a little bit more than that. This year, with upping the transfer from the special recreation fund to $520,000 would leave us with an 18% reserve. And the policy on that fund is 15% versus the other two have the policies of 25%. And then we would see that go up next year with the transfer of $500,000. And depending on how next year goes, possibly we could transfer out more depending on what projects we do and how to fruition everything comes. But that's our fund balance history and our projections. Basically, the takeaway from this is that our fund balances look healthy and available to support the transfers that we're recommending both for the end of this year and then in the budget for 2022.
Questions, comments?
Just a comment. Reading through all of this, our fund balance policy requires us to keep a bank account with approximately $5 million. Is that the simple way of saying it?
In essence, right. And we use, and actually in your board packet each month, we still do show you those cash flow projections. And yes, we do have far more than $5 million on hand.
Right. Well, I'm looking at the numbers and we're close, we're at 10, maybe $11 million. But regardless of what else we spend in the district to maintain a fund balances and be consistent with our accounting requirements, we have to have a bank account of $5 million.
That's well said. Yes.
That it suddenly dawned on me when I saw this chart that that's the kind of number we're talking about. That's the only reason I brought it up.
Commissioner Freeman?
No questions. This is in sync with what we've been looking.
Viola is really, it is a question actually. Looking at the rec fund, in 18 and 19, we were at 40 and 41%. What's the rationale? What's the reason why for 2022, you're at 56%? Why is there such a big jump from those historical numbers?
So my research on this shows that we were transferring $2.5 million to capital in those years. And we stopped that practice last year with the COVID. And then, for this year, we budgeted just transferring $1.5 million, but we are suggesting increasing it to $2 million. We did budget for $2 million next year as we are still in the pandemic and, not 100% sure on how things are going to go. But that's really what is causing that by not transferring the 2.5 million and being at 2 million instead.
So assuming we just transfer 2 million, not 2.5 million, like we did in 18 and 19, does that additional 500,000 roll over to next year?
Yes. Yeah. It
And
would
then
just
next year, if we are, I'm talking about fiscal year 2023, if we feel more comfortable with the COVID situation, that instead of a $2 million transfer, potentially we could do a $2.5 or a $3 million transfer?
Absolutely. And the other thing I would just say right now, we just sold $17 million of debt certificates. So our capital fund is flush with cash until we spend that over the next few years. So knowing that we have that large amount over there doesn't make it as dire to transfer money. And again, like you said, we are still in a pandemic. There is still caution out there that you should keep some, operating cash on hand instead of transferring it all over so that we wouldn't have to, borrow against that fund into the future. So
and with regard to the $17 million, correct me if I'm wrong, but there is some type of covenant within those loan agreements that we have to spend that money within a certain period of time. Is that correct?
Yes, within 3 years.
So it is to the benefit, in order so we don't breach those covenants, that we spend the whole $17 million before we spend any money that's transferred from these other accounts.
Agreed. Yes.
So potentially, if everything goes well and we come out of COVID in a good financial situation, we may have an ability to transfer additional funds out of the rec fund more than what we have included in that 11-year or 10-year funding model, which could provide some additional funds for capital improvements.
Yes, yeah, that is correct. And the other thing I just throw out there, which really hasn't come up in this conversation, we still have $2 million left from the bonds that were issued about a year and a half ago. So we really want to spend that down those two capital categories of cash.
Yeah. So, but it's my recollection, looking at the 5-year capital plan and the green print plans, is that we've allocated the 17 million and the 2 million. That's all been allocated, and that's all taken account that's going to be spent. So I guess my point is that, because we had a discussion at the park board meeting the other night about these tier 6 unfunded projects, that there's maybe an ability to, in a year or two, to have, I'm not saying a windfall, but having an ability to tap into additional funds and still remain at historical norms for our fund balance, additional funds that are not included in that funding model.
Correct. Yeah. Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Mhm.
Anybody else have any other further questions or comments? Okay, next slide.
Okay. All right. Now we are going to look at our recreation functions by center, and we're just going to focus on a few of these that have maybe larger changes year over year from 2020 to 2022. And the first one we'll look at is Westridge Center, although we pretty much touched on this earlier. So while we are showing a little bit decrease in revenue, again, we're really buckling down on expenses related to that. And so it makes our negative number be less of a negative number. We have an improvement of about 43% at that cost center. We also talked about Rosewood Beach and looking at our costs for lifeguards, and we can see that significantly increases from 2020 to 2022. Important to note here, minimum wage has been going up $1 per year. So the difference there is $2 when we're comparing those 2 years against each other. So that's a 94% increase in expenses, although we do anticipate increases in revenue too, as we look to expand our after school and family programs, the return of the annual beach camp out, and creating a new facility rental plan. So that's, I can't remember who had asked that question before, but you really do see that when you look at the beach and the need for lifeguards there and to be as safe as you possibly can. And so that does drive that negative balance even in more into the red by about $30,000. If we look at the well, I'm sorry, you know what? I'm sorry, those programs would really fall into the interpretive center. I take that back. The expansion of the after school and family programs and the annual beach camp out and the facility rental, that would be in the interpretive center. So sorry, that would drive our revenues up there while trying to keep a good hand on expenses. But it's down here where you see those expenses for the lifeguards and the minimum wage increase. And we also do expect the revenues here to go up, and that is due to admissions and parking. So sorry about that confusion there. We'll go to our next slide. And then we also discussed this earlier about Park Avenue, and in the future having this broken out as a sub recreation fund. So what we are budgeting for Park Avenue in 2022, and so we're budgeting that we expect Park Avenue to be open for sailing and boating. We have a market adjustment in the fees that we're charging and our prices, and we have the incorporation of loyalty fees. And so we do see roughly 156% increase in revenue at Park Avenue over that 2-year period. And we're also seeing this increase in expense. And we know that, roughly $118,000 of that is that payment of that debt certificate. And so when we look at Park Avenue as a whole, it was going from being in the red to being in the black, which I believe was someone's question before, and wanting to know, how long would it take for it to be in the black? And we are budgeting that it would be in the black at the end of 2022 if everything comes to fruition that we are budgeting for. We also have the rec center, which we discussed, pretty extensively before. But again, over the 2-year period, we can see that we are anticipating memberships to still be below where they were pre-pandemic, to the tune of about $500,000 less, or a 26% decrease in memberships. But again, we have changed the way memberships are being done over there, and come up with a lot of creative ideas that will hopefully steadily increase our revenues, over 2022 and then into the future, all while maintaining expenses relatively flat over there. The other item we wanted to look at was indoor tennis, who had a great year in 2021. But we're keeping our revenue pretty flat and in line with where we were in 2020, because again, we feel we had a really exceptional year in 2021 and not sure if that will repeat. And we're also there to trying to maintain our expense levels. And so that gives us an increase in our surplus by about $65,000 or 43%. And then finally, we have the Highland Park Golf Learning Center, and they are showing to have a large pickup in revenue. This is going to be based on having extended hours on Fridays and Saturdays and hosting more parties there. And with that increased revenue, they do expect increased expenses. But the difference over the 2-year period is going from being in the red to being in the black by about $70,000, which would be almost a 300% increase in where they were back in 2020. And that's all I have for you this evening, unless anyone has any more questions.
Questions or comments, President Rundberg?
No, thank you. I follow this very well for once.
Commissioner Freeman?
None for me. This looks good. Thank you.
Just when you have, only question or comment I have is that with regard to the Golf Learning Center, maybe at a future facility meeting, if we can have a presentation of what the plans are for to have such a dramatic increase in the revenue. I mean, I would love to hear them.
Okay. I'm sure we can do
We can do
that.
that.
Okay. All right, that's all I have on this item, unless anybody else has anything else they'd like to add on the 2022 budget presentation? Hearing none. Next item, Park Avenue boating launching temporary concrete ramp repair. Director Smith to present.
Thank you very much. So I am following up from a presentation that was provided at the November 4th Lakefront Committee meeting, where we shared the drawings and the proposal from WJE, who we've hired for a temporary repair to the Park Avenue boat ramp. So since that time, we've looked a little further into the work to get maybe a more clear understanding of what the cost may be for this. Well, WJE had suggested that the probable construction cost would be about $35,000. So we reached out to a contractor that we work with on many jobs, who's also very familiar with the ramp. And they confirmed that the cost would be most likely a minimum of $35,000, possibly higher. So what that means is that we would need to bid this project out. The threshold for a bid is $25,000 or higher. So we plan to bid this out. That's going to not allow us to get the work done this year if we chose to move forward with the project. So we plan to release a bid probably in January, and we'll have results in February. At that time, we would have a clear understanding of the cost for this work and be able to look at it from a cost benefit analysis and determine whether or not the district wanted to move forward with that work. And then the work would be done in early spring in time for opening of the ramp before Memorial Day. Are there any questions?
Questions? I'll go with Commissioner Freeman first, who's back from her Uber drive.
Yeah, is this, so this could be, let's say the larger plan moves forward, we could still do this if we voted for it in addition to that work, or are we just sort of working on parallel paths so we have all of our options?
Yeah, all of the above.
Okay.
Exactly that.
Just making sure. Thank you. That's it.
And the idea right now, to make it clear to everyone, including if there's anyone from the public on the call here, is that we want to move forward with the bid so we can get a clear understanding of the cost. Staff are not recommending at this time that we should move forward with it. We need to understand the cost before we can recommend whether or not we should move forward with it.
Awesome. Thank you.
I don't have any questions.
The only question I have is those numbers we just looked at with regard to potential, I'm going to use the word profit from Park Avenue. Are those numbers based upon the upon a partial boat launch? Excuse me, the boat launch being open with the partial fix. Is that what those numbers were based on?
Yeah.
And were those? I see that our executive director shaking his head. Yes, is that correct?
That is
Yeah.
And were
correct.
those also numbers? What was the assumption for the expense for the repair that was baked into those numbers?
It is not in there.
So can we go back to that slide then and see what that regarding Park Avenue back to 2022? You're showing a revenue, but you're not showing an expense. Am I reading that right?
Correct.
Can we go back? Mary Lynn, you still on the phone? You still on the call?
Yes, I am. Hold on, I can
You-
pull that up.
Yeah, can you pull that up?
Sure.
It's like the second to last slide.
Yep, I'm pulling that up. Sorry. Let's see here. Okay. Okay, can you all see that?
Yeah. So let me just see. So you're budgeting, explain the 2022 total budget. Now that's include operating a boat launch with a temporary fix. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. So then, but the expenses, that's a revenue of 268,000, but the expenses of 260,000 do not include the repair.
Correct. That would come out of capital.
I don't know what to say. Anybody else have any comments?
But no, I think, I do. I don't know if it's my, in my son. I think that shows, will need to be shown, and you raised a good point, Cal. I think we get a little bit confused when we see this slide that is by center with revenue, and it doesn't include, I would assume that none of these include the capital expenses, like the ice arena, and we could go down. None of these include the capital expense.
That's correct.
But all
And-
those other, but pardon me to interrupt you, but those are long-term capital. This is like a short-term, which makes it, I guess, more of a unique situation.
Oh, I agree. And that's why I was, I'm glad you asked that question, because I'm a little bit surprised that you would treat that as a capital expense. Is there a reason why it's called capital as opposed to expense?
Only because it's over 25,000, or well, technically over $10,000. Everything goes into our capital plan, our capital budget. But so at this point, there's a lot of unknowns, obviously. And so if we don't do the boat ramp, we will also see a change in this budget because the revenue will go down.
Of course,
significantly.
of course. But,
So-
but Brian, let me interrupt again, because I think I'm seeing a possible disconnect in the numbers that Cal focused on just for Park Avenue. For example, Sunset Valley Golf Club is showing revenue of $1.6 million with expense of $613. But I now realize we're going to spend, I'll throw $300,000 of capital money for the bridges.
Yeah, well, this is sort of the deal though, Barney, with looking at, like, we're looking at Park Avenue slightly differently, but not considering the other facilities in the same way. So to me, this looks operational. This is what it takes to run the place, do maintenance that doesn't require us to vote on things.
Right.
And that this is outside of the capital. So I mean,
Yeah, no, Jen, I appreciate that, but I think it might be, following Cal's lead on this, it might be useful if we saw revenue, expenses, and then capital that's going to be spent in 2022 to generate the revenue.
I have a stupid question. What's the definition of a capital expense?
So it's different. Every entity has a different threshold. I know the city has a larger threshold. It's, whatever is in our policies and procedures. Ours is $10,000. So if something costs us $10,000 or more, and it's a permanent add to something, or even, I don't want to call it temporary, but we're talking about the temporary fix at Park Avenue, it would be considered capital because it's over $10,000, but yet it is, it's there for until we do something else, or if we do something else.
this is why I was a little bit confused in one of our earlier, or not confused, but needed clarification. And when we were looking at the 5-year capital plan in the meeting that we were all there, because ongoing capital improvements or life cycle maintenance, if it's
Jen, did we lose you or did he lose me?
expenses,
You're breaking up.
$5,000 is included in
Jen,
this.
we lost
So-
you. Can you start that
Can you hear
over?
me now?
Yeah, we
Can you
can
hear
hear
me
you.
now?
Yeah.
Okay. Like at Centennial, if the chillers or whatever freeze the ice broke, even if it was 30 grand or 60
All right,
grand or
Jen.
$200,000, like, shoot, we have to.
Jen, it's not working.
Yeah, Jen, unfortunately, you're breaking up.
Looking at
Let me ask a
different
question.
facilities
Let me ask
differently.
a
So they're not
question.
using-
Okay, then maybe I was ignorant, but I always thought a capital improvement was more of a long-term improvement that had more than a 1-year life cycle. And whereas maintenance is basically for an annual maintenance cost, like what it costs to cut the lawn at Sunset Valley, which has to be done on an annual basis. I mean, the bridges at Sunset Valley, I assume the new bridges have a longer lifespan than 1 year. I assume that. I hope they do.
Absolutely.
Okay, so when we're talking about a 1-year Band-Aid, maybe I'm just being ignorant on how accounting works. I just didn't consider that a capital project, even though it may fit your definition. It just didn't. It
Yeah,
doesn't seem right.
I don't think it's ignorant at all, and I think it very well can be coded to operations. So I think that's a very realistic possibility that we could just put it there.
Jen, and maybe you're back.
Yeah,
You back?
I'm back. So,
thanks.
I turned my camera off to conserve some bandwidth here, but,
Okay.
part of it was when we were talking about the tiers of the capital plan and what falls into this, there is some like what you might consider maintenance in your, in layman's terms that falls within that budget. So we were talking about like sort of the ebb and flow and what could cost more over time and what budget does it fall under and how is it coded in terms of our finances. So like looking in a siloed fashion at different facilities, if you put the expense versus the revenue, there's going to be years where they're way off, because there was a capital improvement or whatever. So yeah, the bridges aren't in this because this is showing us what it takes to generally run and maintain to a certain degree the facility. So this is why I was a little over the back confused by us looking so hard at Park Avenue, like why would we spend 2 million? And I'm thinking, well, we didn't spend any money over the last 8 years. So this is just a spike in this type of looking at an expense. We have a busted amenity and we should fix it. So, when you start looking then, I guess, at the maintenance that's above and beyond 25,000 per hit on all of these facilities, you'd have a very different analysis, more akin maybe to the scrutiny that we're giving Park Avenue if you looked at it that way. So I think I appreciate looking at it in terms of operations only, and then capital only. And then if you want to take a look, then maybe we need sort of an overlay of the two. Like, here's what we really spend on all of these facilities, and here's what we get out of them over the term of the fix or the improvement.
That's exactly what I said.
Jen, I'm not objecting to considering projects capital projects. I always thought the definition of a capital project is a long-term fix, whereas the potential replacing the barge and the boat launch is at a permanent fix. That's a capital project that obviously should not be figured into the recreation function by center based on revenues and expenses, because that's a long-term thing. I'm trying to think if there's anything else in the 5-year capital plan that mirrors this interpretation of the definition of a capital project. Is there anything else in the 5-year capital plan that is a short-term fix?
Well, buying a new truck, for example.
That
That's
has
in
a
the 5-year.
15-year, that could have a 15-year life cycle.
If I may, I can read our capital asset policy from our audit. Capital assets are defined by the district as assets with an initial individual cost of more than $10,000, tangible in nature, and have an estimated useful life in excess of 1 year.
So what we've heard from what meeting I sat in is that the temporary fix had a useful life of about a year. That's my recollection of the Smith Group's testimony, or Director Smith's testimony, unless I misunderstood that.
Right. So it sounds like this one is, we could probably put it either way. It sounds like we're right on the edge of what our policy is.
I mean, I'll add something here and say that this is a very unique situation where the repair itself, we feel confident would give us more than a year of life. Therefore, it would fit the category. However, under our current plan, if we feel that this is worth, the cost benefit, we would likely have it in place for less than a year, because our plan is to move forward with the repair of the ramp in the fall.
Let me finish. I'm not making a judgment call. I just want to make sure we're accurately depicting this in the statements.
Of course.
Yeah, and I think we have the flexibility when that decision comes to whether or not to move forward with it. We can decide where to code it. to where it does not matter for the sake of this level of detail, because it'll either go in the rec fund or it'll go in the capital fund. And either way, it's not going to have a material difference on the overall budget. So we can put it wherever we believe it belongs. If we believe it's a short-term fix, we can put it in this center versus capital. So that decision.
And the only reason I bring it up, it was just represented to us that there would be a positive cash flow out of Park Avenue. And I'm not trying to pick on Park Avenue, but that was specifically mentioned by our finance director, there'd be a positive cash flow, but that assumes that the temporary fix is a capital project rather than operational. And so I just want to make sure we're accurately depicting when statements are made, representations are made, that we're accurately depicting what the truth is. But as a judge of the policy, the board may say that's fine. You know, however you want, whatever silo, whatever tranche it's in, that it's fine that we're going to spend the $35, $40, or $50,000 to do it. I just want to make sure that it's just accurately represented to us.
Yep.
And I would just jump in on that. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to pick on this. Obviously, it would be helpful then if you had any other similar item that at some level is a 1-year patch, or maybe 2 years, depending on what we do, Jeff. That would be helpful to understand. But this I think, as Cal is saying, gives a special, just for Park Avenue. I'm trying not to focus on Park Avenue. I know that some people love it and some people don't, but this is giving a representation of a positive cash flow of $7,000, but it may deteriorate down to a negative of $50,000 or zero. And I think we need to highlight that.
Yeah.
And I don't know if there's anything else in the district that falls into that similar category.
Yeah.
I mean, when you bring this back, if this comes back to the finance committee or to the board, if you could report it 3 different ways. You can report it as a capital project. You can report it as operational, that if the money is invested and what the potential positive change would be on that. And then also if the money is not invested, because I'm not aware of any other project within the district that, or any other facility within the district, that if this money is not invested, that all of a sudden we're not going to have the revenue, or maybe I'm missing something. But I think this is the only one I'm aware of. So if you can report it to us 3 different ways, then I think it'd be easier for the board to make a determination whether to spend the money or not.
Yeah, I think it's safe to say that when and I'm not sure if you're asking to do this at the next finance committee, or when we actually get to the time where we get the bid back and we decide to make a decision, if we're going to go forward, we can decide at that point how it will affect the overall, whether it be operational or capital budget, wherever we decide to put it. If we decide to go with the sub-fund analysis that Marilyn was talking before, it would go into Park Avenue no matter what, because the sub-fund will show all revenues, expenses, and capitals and fund balances. And we'll go through that, after the budget. I mean, the truth is, with all of our revenues, expenses, we approve a budget and appropriation, which allows the Park District to make a plan for 2022. But every day that goes by, we could probably change that plan because we get new information. But there has to be a point where we stop making changes, and this is our budget. And when 2022 comes, that's why we see it's not always the same as what we put in the budget. And so I think we'll be able to answer your question and show where exactly it goes and how it affects whether it be operations or capital when we get those bids back.
As I said the other night, is that, when the Park District does a project, they always do something that they always do it right and done in a first-class manner. And I really, maybe at the pool, we've done a temporary fix, maybe with the heaters or with something there maybe, but I don't recall a situation where the entire funding the entire revenue of a facility, or actually the vast majority of the revenue is tied to a temporary fix. Because I just don't remember doing maybe Director Smith, maybe the only analogy I could think of is maybe the pool with the heaters or something there that we've done a Band-Aid.
No, that I'd say it's a correct statement. I can look closer into it, but this is truly a unique situation that we really don't have a good comparison of.
So I think it's because of the uniqueness of the situation. Again, but I'm not trying to pick on Park Avenue, but it's an obviously unique situation. I think it just needs a level of understanding, and accurate reporting, so when the board does make decisions that that they have the information. And I think since we're talking about it now, I would prefer that we track this through the budget process.
We could let the bridges go for 8 years and then no one could golf, but.
Well, by the way, I disagree with that. We've spent money down at Park Avenue. We were dredging on an annual basis to allow that boat launch to run. So listen, I don't agree that no money has ever been spent down there. And there
I think
been
it's more the issue of the breakwater, really.
Okay, but I'm saying, but the statement was made that no money's been spent down there, and that's not true, because we spent a lot of money dredging on an annual basis to allow that boat launch to boat launch to work with other things that have been spent, other capital improvements made to it. It's just a decision was made not to spend money on that facility pending. You also have to remember there was years that we didn't have access to it.
Oh, I completely get it. I'm just saying it's unique for a number of reasons, not simply because, it's an
Because it's a
outlier.
one-year fix.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're very clear on the request, and I think it's a very easy way for us to show this when that time comes. I'm not sure how to reflect it in the budget, because we don't know that we're going to have the expense. We can certainly show it, but at this point, again, we're not showing the expense or the lack of revenue if we don't do it. So it's being shown the way it is right now, and it will change in 2022 once we find out more information.
And again, maybe I'm oversimplifying this, because this recreation function by center, I know the finance director qualified that this is not part of the budget presentation, but she went through this anyway. So if you continue to present this type of information as you do the budget, at the same time you provide the budget, if you could just provide it in this manner, so at least we could follow, because obviously this project may evolve and we may have some better answers as we progress. I just want to make sure that that we're looking at it within the same lens.
Absolutely, you got it.
Okay?
Now, I have to ask a question of Jeff Smith. I'm sorry, everybody.
Yeah.
Jeff, you said that we would not be able to get bids until next year?
So if we were in the really fortunate circumstance where when we reached out to the contractor, we found out it was going to be well below 25,000, we could have received quotes and possibly moved forward with it like this December. But with the window for the construction is closing very rapidly. So even if we release the bid, next week, we wouldn't be able to go through that formal process in time to construct it any earlier than next spring. So therefore, what we plan to do is release the bid most likely in January and look for approval or recommend approval in February for construction sometime in April or maybe May.
So by doing that, we would lose the early boaters who always strive to get into the water in April and May. Well, that's okay. I'm just saying we have to look at the cost benefit when it comes down. That's what it comes down to.
Yeah, well, the annual dredging doesn't occur until it's before Memorial Day, so we can't vouch for the status of the boat launch before then.
Yeah.
And I will just add that the reason why we are focusing on Park Avenue boat facility temporary concrete ramp repair is because it's an agenda item tonight. If any of the commissioners want to have another discussion regarding the bridges at Sunset Valley or any other capital project, then my suggestion is we add that as an agenda item, a separate agenda item on the finance committee meeting. Just like tonight, we have the agenda item regarding the Park Avenue boating launch, and we can focus on that. And again, that's the reason why we focused on Park Avenue, is because it's actually on our agenda.
Right. And this, I feel a little slightly directed at me because I did point out the bridges, but only because that's another type of repair and expense, right? That's required and not included in this. But we've discussed those and I've approved the plans for that. And I looked at the cost of that, and I think looking at that, like, you know, we don't have a golf course if those bridges fail. And I love that amenity, just like, you know, many people in town. So I voted to have that continue. I don't want to pick apart every piece of this. I just want to make sure, just like you do, that we're looking at this through the same lens. That's it, Cal. And
Okay,
I like this discussion, so I appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Again, I just want to be, I'm not making it, I'm just trying to make sure it's accurately reflected so we have the information when we do make decisions. That's that's my goal at least. So I think we're on the same page. All right. I think we talked this to death. I think this ship has sailed.
Oh.
So-
And you could say
Very
it's and Cal, you could say it's a sunk cost.
Okay,
Oh my
so-
goodness. Ba-dum-bum.
Okay, so if there's anything else on the Park Avenue vote, hearing none. Next item on the agenda is other business. Is there any other business from staff or the board?
I am putting my raise hand.
Okay, President Ruttenberg.
Couldn't find the raise hand. I would just like to get a quick overview of the interviews and when we'll get the tapes of the interviews for Westridge.
You will get them before the end of the day. Before the end of the evening.
And could you give us a quick overview of the interviews?
We had 4 interviews. And
Oh,
they
come
all
on.
did a good job.
Be a little more forthcoming, please.
What would you like to know?
All right. Is there a consensus, and we won't talk now as to who or what, is there a consensus from the team that did the interview as to a standout group? And I don't even know, we don't even need to know who it is because we're all going to look at it separately. I'm just curious if the team that did the interviews came away with a choice for the prom queen.
I think that we have a firm who we think did an outstanding job, who stood out from the rest. I would say that that's correct.
Okay. And how do we have access to the interview tapes?
So we will be sending out a link, and it'll be a YouTube link, and you'll be able to view that. It's a private link, so you'll be able to watch those. And then we will also give you a PDF of the presentations, so you'll have both.
Okay, and that PDF will have, did they give us little models or how did they do that?
Yep, you'll see pictures and renderings from all the firms.
Are they sitting in your office?
No,
No, there's no physical models.
Oh, okay.
they were all. You'll see it in the presentation, and then you'll have a PDF of the presentation. So
Oh,
you'll hear
okay.
the visual. You can follow along in the PDF.
Okay,
that
so
we'll
you
email.
see the generation I come from where the architect would have built a little model and,
Oh yeah.
you know, the little trees and the little people.
Our
That's when they were
stipend
living in
wasn't quite.
caves, by the way. That's when people
Yeah,
were
we
living in
did
caves.
not compensate them enough for that.
Yeah,
No.
that's 20 grand a piece.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask, this is the question I thought President Ruttenberg was going to ask, but I hate to ask it this way, but I'm just going to come out. What's our time commitment? How long are these tapes?
So I would say the presentation portion is the most important portion for everyone to watch, and those are about 20 to 30 minutes. But every interview did go 90 minutes, so a full hour and a half for every interview. I think you would get a very good indication of each of the firms through the 20 to 30 minute presentation, and then you can go from there.
When you circulate this to our other board members who are not here this evening, is if you could just indicate to them, there's a Cliff Note version that's probably between 20 and 30 minutes per interview. And then there's obviously the whole War and Peace if you want to stay and watch the whole thing. So your time commitment, by the way, War and Peace is a long book if anybody didn't know that. And okay, it's your time commitment is anywhere between 2 hours and 6 hours.
Will do.
Okay, because we have to budget our time and we have to work it around football games over the weekend. So
I don't know if you budget your time, but you definitely should plan your time.
Who's
Okay.
who's we?
If you watch the whole video, we'll double your salary, Cal.
So basically, it's 2 college football games of tapes.
Oh,
Okay.
that's something to think about. And our schedule from this point on, the architects, just remind us as we finish this up.
So I'll include this detail in the email, but we hope to have, well, we are going to be meeting as staff at 4 p.m. on Monday. We're actually going to see if the board has interest in participating in that. If any board members who do watch the videos, depending upon availability, can include you in that conversation. But from there, the next meeting where we discuss this is on December 2nd. Unless we hold this, yeah,
December, at the facility committee meeting
that's correct.
on December 2nd. With
Yes.
the thought that we'd have approval to proceed by the board on the 7th.
No, well, it depends. There's a few options. We can either bring back firms to interview, or the top 2, or we can choose the top 1 right out of the gate.
Okay, we'll see after we look at the tapes. And you, in the email you're sending, you'll have information about the Monday conversation.
Yes.
Okay. Anything else, Jen? Do you have anything?
Nope, I've said a mouthful. I'm good.
Okay.
Thank you.
So did I. I have another meeting to go to anyway.
I move to adjourn.
Wait, we're not there yet. Staff, is
Oh.
there anything else? We're not be going to closed session. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So
Motion by
moved.
President Rudberg, second by
Second.
Commissioner Friedman. All in favor, say aye. The ayes have it. We're
Aye, aye, aye.
adjourned at 5:46. Barney, I'll give you a call. Talk to you about